right, back at it on the Open Floor NBA podcast. We talk about the league and all the goings on in it. And we're in studio today.
Woohoo!
Rachel Nichols.
We're so fancy.
In studio with me.
We fancy.
Started as a recurring guest. Now you're an in-studio guest with me here in Las Vegas. We're here for the NBA Cup.
And look, you have a horse.
I do have a horse and some greenery,
Yeah.
shrubbery here now. Great studio. Happy to be back here with you. We're recording this on the eve of the NBA Cup Finals, so there'll be no talk of Milwaukee and Oklahoma City. Unfortunately,
Okay, that's it.
We don't.
Those two cities are off the board. They're no longer part of America as far as we're concerned.
We can't. Like, we're just.
We
hoping,
love you. We hope you do well. We wish you the best.
We are hoping that there's not some outlandish outcome to the NBA
that
Cup
nullifies
Final that makes this, null and void. No injuries. Knock
exactly.
on
Knock
whatever
on everything. Knock on the horse.
But there is a lot to talk about here on the show because we have officially started trade season in the NBA. December 15th, of course, the day when contracts signed in the offseason, players can be dealt. And sure enough, we had an interesting one over the weekend. The Golden State Warriors acquiring Dennis Schroder from the Brooklyn Nets, trading DeAnthony Melton and some second-round draft capital swap to get Schroder to Golden State, averaging 18.7 assists per game for Brooklyn, which is probably one of the reasons the Nets wanted to trade him.
I was going to say.
He was playing a little bit.
Stop doing that.
Please, we're trying to
Stop with the basket and the scoring and the. I mean, come on.
I do love that the game following the trade, the Nets just got obliterated, and it's like Sean Marks must have been sitting there being like, that's more what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about there. But Golden State gets the player. Like, they get Dennis Schroder having an all-star caliber year. So my question is this: How impactful do you see this deal? How much of a needle mover is Dennis Schroder to Golden State?
Well, look, short term, he's great because they really have struggled with Steph Curry off the floor. If you look at his on-off numbers, their offensive rating when he's not on, they need someone who can do a better job than Pod simply has been doing. And, this will give a veteran, steady hand. Steve Kerr joke that Dennis Schroeder's kicked his ass on 3 different continents with his play for Team Germany. And this is a guy who knows how to fit in with this kind of group. He's been in all of these kinds of situations. So I think even if he ends up staying there, he'll be a great sort of move for them. I do think, though, Golden State is looking to make a bigger deal. And because they made this deal, the timing, again, you are much more of the cap apron guru than me, although I see no apron on you at the moment. No. But I believe it's that because they made this deal when they made it, they can still repackage him for a trade, which would not be the case if they had made it a little bit later. So I would just say that while this was a good move for them, it certainly doesn't prevent them from doing more going forward.
Yeah, it in some ways, it reminded me of the sign and trade deal, ironically, that they did with Brooklyn involving Kevin Durant and D'Angelo Russell.
Yes.
I mean, they got D'Angelo Russell back. And at the time, you're kind of thinking like, all right, well, what do they want D'Angelo Russell for? Well, it turns out they did. They swapped him in that deal that brought Andrew Wiggins to the Warriors. Look, Schroeder's a good player. Like 18.7 assists, that's nothing to sneeze at. He's got to be better than what Brandon Podziemski has been giving them up until this point. Like, his numbers have been, very mediocre. He's right now, as we talk, 38.5%. No, he's at 30 or 24.7%.
It's worse. It's worse.
I was going to say, he was 38.5% from 3 last year.
Yep.
He's at 24.5% this year. His drop off in shooting across the board has been significant. That's cost them something.
Yeah.
So you get Schroeder in, a more reliable shooter, a more reliable player, as you said, someone that's going to take some of the ball handling responsibilities off of Steph Curry. That can only help. I think, though, I don't want to get too excited because whenever I see a guy that is on his 8th team in 8 years, you start to wonder why, right? Like, and the circumstances now are unique. Brooklyn's trying to lose. Of course, they want DeAnthony Melton, who can't play, who literally can't play because he's out for the rest of the season. So it's the
best ability is inavailability.
Exactly. So I do wonder, like, Schroeder, someone who's in a contract year too, like, is he looking out for number one too often? Like, how does his skill set mesh with Steph? He can be a little ball dominant at times. He's taken over games in a positive way with Team Germany in Brooklyn this season. Do you have any concerns there about kind of the fit? Because they're going to plug him right into the starting lineup and say, hey, you're now Steph's new running mate.
Yes, they are. I also think, though, he will play a lot when Steph Curry isn't there. I mean, just because they start together doesn't mean that they're going to be joined at the hip, obviously, as you know. I mean, I think Dennis Schroder has moved teams a lot for a lot of different reasons. I think earlier in his career, he certainly was seen as headstrong and what kind of influence he on the rest of the guys or that kind of thing. He, like all of us, has mellowed, I think, a bit with age when you have a conversation with him. And he's just at a salary and skill position where he's very movable in today's NBA. And I think that we're going to see this whole class of guys in the coming years with the way these new CBAs are constructed who just sort of go from, carpetbagging from place to place because they've got deals that are portable.
So we mentioned that Golden State is probably not done, right? Mike Dunleavy Jr. in a conference call with reporters basically said as much, said, look, we're still looking to maximize this window that Steph Curry is in right now. They tried with Lauri Markkanen. That didn't work. They now get Dennis Schroder. I'm kind of surveying the landscape, and I'm wondering what the best fit is out there for him. We're going to talk about Jimmy Butler again in a minute, but I don't know if I see that needle mover out there for them right now. Do you see like a deal that is pursuable for Golden State that makes any kind of sense?
I mean, I think the Butler deal is the one we're talking about, right? With that team, and they just have to decide, do they want to make that financial investment if Jimmy does go on to pick up his option, which, of course, I would never pick up that option except when it comes time to pick up that option.
$50 million is a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. So, they have to sort of make a bunch of decisions about where they want to go, what they want to take on, how he would fit in with team chemistry. I mean, Jimmy he himself will tell you, is a very particular kind of player. He likes to say, I'm not for everyone. Is he going to fit into that joy Golden State culture?
Probably, though, right? Because he's not for everyone, especially everyone in this context, I think, is young players, right?
Yeah.
Like he had a lot of issues with the Timberwolves early on. He had a lot of issues with Ben Simmons in Philadelphia. It really hasn't had many issues in Miami. Like it is a young team, but that culture down there has really meshed well with Jimmy Butler. I don't see too many guys on Golden State that he'd have issue with. He and Draymond seem like they're cut from the same cloth. Steph, of course, same thing,
I don't think there's anything personal there. In fact, I think he'd be a really welcome addition culturally to the locker room and everything. This is a guy who wants to win, who comes through in the clutch. I mean, you see Steph Curry's clutch shooting numbers. You see what Jimmy Butler has done in the clutch in the playoffs. I mean, this is a guy that they would want around. It's just culturally in terms of how he approaches playing on a team and sort of organizationally. I wonder what the long-term fit would be, but maybe it's not a long-term decision. Maybe it's a half a year and a half kind of thing.
Do you think that he makes them considerably better? Because I'm trying to guess at what they'd have to give up, right? You'd have to put Andrew Wiggins' contract in that. Maybe you have to throw Brandon Podziemski into that. I doubt they'd throw Kuminga in there. I think they want to hold on to him. He's got all-star potential. But draft capital as well. I'm trying to gauge, Andrew Wiggins having a pretty good year. Podziemski off to a bad start, but I think he's more the player we saw last year. Like, I think there's a way for him to bounce back. Like, does Jimmy Butler, or how much does Jimmy Butler move the needle in Golden State would be my question.
I think he moved the needle in Golden State, but if you're Miami, you want Jonathan Kuminga in that deal.
I don't know if I'd do that. I don't I don't know if I'd put Kuminga in that deal if I was Golden State.
Well, then this gets back to maybe that you don't make the trade. I mean, this is what's so hard about this time of year, right? I mean, it's worth it up to a point. Is it worth it to the point of Kuminga? And if you're not getting Kuminga in Miami, then are you looking to knock on? I mean, you suggested Denver last week and knocking on the door from, Michael Porter Jr. You got to get back. If you're Miami, you want to get back somebody that can continue to spark your team. Because if you look at where you are with Bam Adebayo, you don't want. I mean, they're not rebuilding, right?
Right. All right. Let's expand on this Butler conversation here, because we did touch on him briefly last week. We're just talking about him here now. He's the big name that's out there on the trade market. He can opt out of his contract, as you said, at the end of this season. He had 35 points in 44 minutes on Monday. So his engine's starting to run a little bit down there in Miami. Still playing at a high level. Miami is 13-11 right now as we record this. Back half of the top 10 in both offensive and defensive efficiency. Middle of the pack right now in the Eastern Conference. I'm sure in Miami that they believe that if they can just get into the playoffs, they can beat anybody. And they've got a body.
As they always do.
And they've got a body of work to show that, right? They were the 8th seed back in 2022. They got all the way to the finals. Before we talk about Butler and where he should go or where he can go, does Miami need to trade him? Like, do you look at this Heat team saying, like, all right, you got a guy who says he's going to opt out of his contract, who's 35 years old, who doesn't really fit into the timeline of the roster they've got there. All the star players on their roster, including Bam Adebayo, who's remarkably still only 27.
I know,
thought he was
crazy.
like 30. Bam Adebayo, still 27 and younger. Like, should there be urgency in Miami to trade Jimmy Butler?
It really depends on, do you believe that he's going to opt out of that deal? Jimmy has said, to whatever degree they're allowed to talk about contracts. He's indicated that he will be opting out of the deal, and they'd lose him for nothing. And the idea is to create some urgency there and to have him have some say over where he goes. That's if you believe him. And honestly, it's really about what's that market going to be this summer. Do you think anyone else is going to offer him that much money?
Well, no, I don't. At 35 years old and 36 next season, like, who is giving Jimmy Butler a 3-year deal at $50 million per year? Look, Miami, they could have signed Jimmy Butler to an extension already. They still can. Right now, up until I think June 30th, they can sign Butler to a 2-year, $113 million extension, which would make his value of his contract $150, $160 million, whatever it may be. They're choosing not to do that. So that tells me that they don't believe that Jimmy Butler is a part of their long-term future. And right now, they've got the guy that there could be a bidding war for, because whether it's Golden State, Houston, throw Dallas into the mix. We talked a little bit about Denver last week.
Cleveland.
There are 3 or 4 teams that really need a Jimmy Butler. And when you have that many teams clamoring, that gives you a chance to maximize your value. That puts you in kind of that Oklahoma City seat when they traded Paul George, or when Danny Ainge moved Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett to Brooklyn. You can get the kind of haul that can transform your franchise. And look, I know Miami, they operate differently. They want to be as competitive as possible, as long as possible. They don't believe in rebuilding, but sometimes you got to think long term. You got to think of the future. And trading Butler for a package that includes a young centerpiece player and a handful of draft picks, that to me is in the best interest of your franchise much more than Jimmy Butler.
This comes back to, they're going to want Jonathan Kuminga.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if you're Miami, and your point is absolutely right. You've got the guy, right? You want to be in that driver's seat come the trade deadline. You want the guy that everybody wants, because there's not that many trades that can get made in today's NBA. We keep going back to this, the way the CBA is structured. It's going to be a boring trade deadline, Chris. I don't think we're going to have any of these kind of pyrotechnics we've had in the last few years on this trade deadline.
The Cam Johnsons and the Dorian Finney-Smiths and whoever else Brooklyn can eject before the deadline. Like, that's much it.
That's it, right? This is not going to be exciting. So if you've got a guy who's a difference maker, you are in the driver's seat, but that means that you can demand a higher price. And then that gets back to these teams. Are you willing to give up Jonathan Kuminga? Are you willing to give up Michael Porter Jr.? Are you willing to give up some of the things that it'll take? When Houston keeps saying, waving its hands and stomping its feet and say, nope, we're not making one of these deals. We don't want James Harden back. We don't want Jimmy Butler to come here.
Would you do it, though, if you're Houston? Like, I get the James Harden stuff that Ime was talking about. Like, at that point in time, James Harden made 0 sense.
Yes.
But Houston right now is a top 4 team in the conference. They've got a great defense. They've got good young talent. And they're not at that point where it's getting overly expensive to keep that talent, but they might get there. Yeah. And they're going to get there sooner rather than later. Like, I'm not sure I believe all this rhetoric coming out of Houston about we're not ready to make that type of move yet, especially when you got Jimmy Butler, who's from Houston, who would probably be inclined to re-sign there on a multi-year deal. I'm not so sure I buy all that.
Well, it's a timeline issue, right? You were talking about his age versus, I mean, that's a young team, the Houston team, right? And look, they've got depth that they could give up, certainly. I mean, to them, if they made that deal, they would not get worse, right? I mean, you're really talking about the ability to not only short-term get better with Jimmy Butler, but not get worse long-term. My point is you really can still protect your future if you're Houston. But, I mean, I don't know, at some point, if you stomp and insist and fight and claw, I'm not doing this deal, I'm not doing this deal, at what point do we believe them?
Never.
Not until 01 on the deadline of the trade day.
Every time, and you talk to a lot of people too, like every time I get a phone call or I hear an on-the-record conversation or an on-the-record quote from Mike and Jim, like, no, we love our guys.
We love our guys. Love our guys.
It's utterly meaningless. You have to say stuff like that. You don't want the young guys in that locker room thinking they're trade bait. I think Houston is going to be a player in all this over the next couple of months. I do think, though, to bring it back to Denver, they've got to be the most aggressive here because they do have the best player to be moved in a deal like that. I mean, Michael Porter Jr. at like 26, I think he is. Like, if I'm Miami, I'd want to get my hands on that guy.
Sure, 3-point shooter in a league where that's all that matters. That
guy fits the timeline. That guy fits the mold. I think that Eric Spoelstra could unlock even more from Michael Porter Jr. He's never going to be a great defensive player. You're always going to have some problems on that end of the floor. But his 3-point shooting, his versatility, his size, he's kind of shaken off the health issues that dogged him early on. He's been a pretty reliable guy most of the last couple of years. both these teams seem to be in that kind of place where a trade makes sense for both of them. Miami would be able to get, not draft capital because Denver doesn't have any draft capital, but you can get a centerpiece guy in Michael Porter Jr., maybe get a Zeke Naji, some other young depth there as well. But you get a guy that more fits your timeline. And if you're Denver, you got to do something. It's been so bad out there and so average and mediocre out there that you got to do something to shake things up.
You've convinced me since last week. That's it. I am on the Chris Mannix Denver train on this because, look.
Careful. They don't like me much in Denver sometimes. When I talk Denver Nuggets basketball, I get some angry messages on social media.
You're in the coal car of the train?
Yes,
They don't let you out?
No, they don't.
But no, I mean, look, obviously you'd be nervous if you're Denver to get rid of a guy like Michael Porter Jr. and the offense and the shooting and the three-point shooting that he can bring. But you signed Jamal Murray to that contract. So at some point,
by the way, it looks worse and worse.
I get it, but you have to have faith that he can come around, right? Otherwise, the whole experiment's kind of off.
What do you think of what you're seeing from Murray, though? Because I don't really get it, right? Like defensively, he's never been a good defender. I think he's got to take, and Michael Malone has said this, like you got to take more pride in your defense. You got to take it personally that you're being hunted every single night. The offensive inefficiency, though, if you were making a power rankings of the things that are wrong in Denver right now, Murray's inefficiency, I think, is at the top of the list because he has not been the number 2 guy that he's been for so many years. Jokic is having an outstanding offensive season. Not great defensively, but he's having a great offensive season. Jamal Murray is not carrying his weight offensively, and I don't get it. His numbers across the board have cratered.
I mean, look, he does tend to get better as seasons go on. So if that continues this year, if that trend happens, that will obviously be something that will help them compete if they can get a Jimmy Butler or someone like that. But he hasn't started this low. And I don't know if it's injuries finally catching up to him. I don't know if it's, I have always been a Jamal Murray defender, but he has been called an overachiever a lot. And maybe he's just achieving now. I don't know. I think I would have liked to have seen him named to one All-Star game.
To never make the All-Star
game,
forever.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, look, I think that it's a numbers game, the All-Star game, right? He couldn't be here. It's not that he wasn't an All-Star caliber player. It's just that he couldn't fit onto one of those rosters. It remains, though, that Jokic has never had an All-Star number 2 with him. Right? Can you imagine if he did have a guy of Jimmy Butler's track record next to him and in the West, where we've talked about this too, Oklahoma City's only getting better. These other teams, younger teams, Minnesota, the Rockets, they're only getting better. If you are Denver with Nikola Jokic, the time to win is now.
Yeah. And I think Butler is the kind of guy that could energize that team. Maybe he could energize Jamal Murray, that competitive edge, bringing that into that locker room. I think that would be important. And he'd also solve some defensive problems. Like their defense has been so bad all season long. And look, to be fair, Jokic is a big part of that. Jokic, I was talking to an assistant coach recently who coached against Denver, and he was raving about the offense. The offense is great. But he also pointed out that Jokic looks heavy this year. And defensively, he's kind of regressed to the point where he's just a subpar defender. Like he was in the last couple of years, I think, trending towards becoming at least an average team defender. He's never going to be Joel Embiid on that end of the floor, but he was trending towards being a good to average defender. He's taken a step back, and some of that might be the burden that's on him.
He looks tired. I mean, he's got to do so much, and it's not just physically. It's
37.5 minutes per game.
I was going to say
him, Murray, and Porter Jr. all averaging career highs in minutes.
I mean, and it's mentally too, though. He knows. I mean, especially with Jamal playing the way he is, he knows that it's got to be him every night. These 40-something point games every night, over and over again. I think if he was able to get help, whoever that is at the deadline, you will see him improve in terms of his approach, defense, his effort, right? I mean, so much of that, and we saw him improve over his time. Getting in shape and staying in shape is hard when you're that size. You have to be motivated to do it. You have to think there's a reason for it. So if I'm Denver in the front office, I want to maximize and make Jokic back into the player he was, and that has to come with some sort of energizing trade. I just don't know if they can do it. I mean, I don't know if I've seen from them the last couple of years the kind of front office wizardry that this team needs right now.
Yeah, some of the decisions do trace back to Tim Connelly, to be fair. The decision to give Porter Jr. that deal was a mistake at that time. That's a big number that they're still paying the price for to a degree. But their young players have not developed in the ways that they've needed them to. They have made some interesting decisions when it comes to veteran talent, most recently with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and now they're in this weird spot where you've got a generational talent that you're kind of toiling away with in the back half of the conference playoffs. I do think Michael Malone has to bring these minutes down because it's like we're about to talk about with LeBron. Even if you get to the postseason, like a 4-5 seed in the playoffs, if Jokic is playing 37.5, 38 minutes per game, if Murray is up around that range, if Porter Jr. is high, these guys are going to be gassed out come playoff time. You got to trust some of these young guys. I don't know. Look, injuries have been a problem for them, over the course of the season. Aaron Gordon's injuries.
Yeah. I mean, that is going to make a big difference when he's back.
Especially defensively. He's the most versatile defender on that team. One of the most versatile defenders in the league. He should have a big overall impact, but that's a team that needs a shakeup. That's a team that needs to be aggressive, and I think Jimmy Butler is the right fit for that group. I mentioned LeBron, and we say every week we're not going to talk about LeBron.
You say it. I've been around long enough to know that sentence will never be true.
Well, I always assume that, all right, maybe there'll be a dull week in LeBron world, and there won't be a reason to talk about.
Have you not been paying attention the last 21 years?
It's never dull in LeBron world, and this week is no different. LeBron James returned to the lineup over the weekend for the Lakers. Missed 2 games with a foot injury, and he talked to reporters after the last game, and I thought it was notable that he not only talked about the need to take some time off and rest his foot, but he also talked about, getting his mind right. I'm going to read the quote. He said, quote, "I had an opportunity to take more days and get my mind, body, and everything where I wanted it to be, and it worked out." What do you make of LeBron at the quarter pole of the season needing to take time to get not just his body right, but his mind right?
It's a very unusual situation. I think they had, two games in 10 days. He didn't play those games. He actually was away from the team, just basically using his house as a home base and working out and doing all the things. JJ said if anybody in that time wanted to travel, they could. So we don't know if he went anywhere or not. But I mean, the idea was that he would just have a break. And this is a guy who went from last season straight into Team USA stuff. And we saw really took the mental and physical leadership role with Team USA, which in that group is saying quite a lot. Won the gold medal, which was I know that it sort of all worked out the way we expected with Team USA, and we got those great moments in both the semi and final games. But remember that those games were close and exciting because it was very hard for them to win that gold medal. And if you were around that team this summer, and I was over in Paris with them, you saw how tense they were, right, Chris? Like you saw that was a very mental and physically stressful few weeks for them, few months really, if you go back to training camp. And so he went straight from that to the beginning of another Lakers season where he's sort of the guy that everything falls on, a new coach, and his son's coming in and all that sort of stuff. He needed a week off. He took a week off. We'll have to see how that goes from there. He came back. He had a dunk and a block in the first few minutes of being back on the floor.
I'm not against LeBron needing time off. In fact, just last week, I was advocating for it. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about how, why is LeBron on a long road trip playing the first end of a back-to-back against Utah? Why is he even out there? This idea that he was going to play all 82 games this season, which is an idea that he put into the universe, never made any sense. They always should have been strategic about all this. I am a little bit concerned, though, when a guy says, I needed a mental break right now. And look, this season has not gotten off the type of start the Lakers had hoped. They are effectively exactly where they were last year. The record the Lakers have had through 20-plus games is almost identical to what they had last year with Darvin Ham. The problems are largely the same. The inconsistencies, the defensive issues, it is what it is. It's not surprising because I think we both agreed a coaching change wasn't going to fundamentally change who this team was. It's not an indictment on JJ Redick in the same way it wasn't an indictment on Darvin Ham. This is just a flawed roster with 2 A-level guys and a bunch of other guys that are just kind of good, right? Dalton Knecht has been a great story all season long, but you're seeing kind of his issues defensively are playing him off the floor a little bit. Max Christie got the start the other night. The first thing JJ said after that game was, wow, look at how good Max Christie, played defensively. Russell has the ability to get hot, but he also has the ability to take some incredibly mind-blowing bad shots. I watched that last game. He was jacking up some early in the shot clock three-pointers that had to have driven JJ completely crazy. This, I don't know, they're in this spot where I just start to wonder, how frustrated is LeBron going to get as this season progresses? And what moves, if any, can the Lakers make to push them to a higher level?
Look, we've seen on LeBron teams, Cleveland, LA, where half the roster feels like it changes at the trade deadline. I mean, that's kind of a LeBron special at some points. We say, half the team's getting traded away. And it's been successful at times, right? It's worked. They've gone on these second half season runs, again, in both cities. But we haven't seen it from Rob Pelinka these last season and a half where it's worked. He pulled a couple off a couple seasons ago. It has not happened since. This is essentially the same roster as Darvin Ham had. If the players don't work, the players don't work. It doesn't matter what else you do with them. And I am very interested to see if this team continues to be sort of mediocre where it is, if that affects LeBron's decision, how much longer he wants to play. If he needs more of these, I'm taking a few days off here and there, because it's just like we were talking about Nikola Jokic. Everyone out there is human. When you come to work and you feel like things are positive and going well and we can accomplish something, you are going to put more effort in. If you come to work and you feel like, what is the point of this anyway? You are going to put less effort in. And that is true of LeBron James, Nikola Jokic, myself, the person down at the hardware store, all of us. And it's human nature. And I'm very interested to see what happens with this guy who is trying to do something at age 40, very few have done, and a team that is right now not equipped for that kind of success.
You were pretty adamant a couple of weeks ago that LA is LeBron's last stop. Given what we've seen through the last couple of weeks, and given what we just heard from LeBron about the mental and physical toll this season is taking on him, do you still believe that?
I do. I just do. Look, I get it. I get all the sort of playtime of where could LeBron James be traded? Where would he go? What about seeing him and Steph together? I think LeBron is intrigued by that. I mean, he certainly played with it publicly and sort of likes spicing up that conversation. In the end, is he really going to ask to leave the Lakers, which is what he would have to do? Jeannie's not going to just trade him. He has a no trade clause anyway. I mean, It's not even in Jeannie's hands. He would have to ask. Is he going to go on the record and ask to leave the Lakers, the team that he came and settled to, the team that just drafted his son, and say, I would like to be dealt. You no longer have the LeBron James show in town. He's not going to do that, Chris.
You're probably right, but like, what did he sign the contract for? 2 more years after the season? Like, is he really going to go 2 full seasons like this? Like, Anthony Davis is playing at an incredibly high level, all NBA level, and they're still in this spot where they're in the bottom half of the Western Conference playoff bracket. Like, can you actually see LeBron James finishing this season as a 6, 7, 8 seed, getting bounced in the first round, and then running that back once again? Because it doesn't get much better if you're the Lakers. Like, yeah, you can hope for some organic growth with some of these young guys on the roster, but they're kind of landlocked because of the moves they made the last couple of years. Can you really see LeBron playing out the professional string of his career, like finishing it, not in the same way that Kobe finished his career, because Kobe, had some injuries at the back end, but just kind of toiling in relative obscurity at this point?
Well, I mean, but that's the question then, right? Yeah. The question is he capable of doing a version of that? And we just have to see how much of a version it is. If he makes the playoffs every year, but just doesn't go very far, is that enough? I mean, I don't know where the medium line is for him. But wherever it is, if he falls below that line, is it going to lead him to retire, or to him to ask for a trade to another team? And as much as I don't think he's looking to retire yet, I really don't. I think he still likes being LeBron James, superstar basketball player. I think if those are the 2 options down the road, I just think it's a lot more likely that he ends up taking his final bow than he does to go to the Lakers and ask for a trade after his history there, after his history of moving around in a way that a lot of superstars at his level haven't done before, and then to go ask to go to another team after they've drafted his kid. There's 16 reasons there I don't see that happening.
Well, do you think is it a legacy hit for him if he does that?
Is it actually a legacy hit? Of course not. Yeah. He's LeBron James. He's done like the idea that anything's a legacy hit to me is ridiculous. In the end, when the records are down and we're generation or 2 past this version of talk radio, LeBron James' legacy will be fine. So it's not actually a legacy hit. Is it in terms of public opinion? Would it be a public opinion hit? Damn straight it would be, right? Don't you think? I mean, do you see any world where NBA fandom is not hypercritical of a LeBron James asking the Lakers to trade him so he can go chase another title?
But hypercritical of LeBron, it's like you're hypercritical of LeBron no matter what. So no matter what he does, he's damned if he does and he's damned if he doesn't.
I think he cares about to what level and where.
But like even like Laker fans, like you and I both know a lot of Laker fans. They haven't embraced him like they embraced Kobe, and it's just different, right?
Yeah.
They
It's always going to be different.
They appreciate what he's doing out there, but Kobe will always be the biggest name in recent modern Laker history. So I don't know that Laker fans would revolt if LeBron asked for a trade. In fact, they might actually be appreciative. If you got a package for LeBron, I don't even know what he'd fetch at this point. What kind of deal you can get for a soon-to-be 40-year-old?
Okay, you really let's do it. You're really talking about
down that rabbit
all right.
hole?
You're really only talking about Golden State, right?
Yes.
He's not asking to go anywhere else.
I agree.
Okay,
I agree.
So do it. Do the Golden State trade that would actually work.
I mean, you're Wiggins, Pajemski, draft capital. I mean, I don't have the trade machine up in front of me, but something like that.
Is that worth it if you're the Lakers?
Depending on how much draft capital you get back in return. I mean, you've given away so much. Look, it's a domino effect, though, right? Like if you trade LeBron, you trade an AD too, which would also bring back a big package. In fact, AD would bring back more because he's younger, he's under contract for the long term, he's in the prime of his career. So you'd be not just dealing one. It would be in some ways like when Boston deconstructed its roster with KG and Pierce and then eventually Rondo. It at least give you a direction, because right now I don't think they have a direction. They're just kind of this rudderless ship that wants to be a playoff team and is trying to contend with its stars, but just has no path to it. Like you can't convince anybody, including probably most people in that Laker organization, that they're a contender.
Yeah, but if you're the Lakers and you're operating in Los Angeles and you are the Los Angeles Lakers and everything with that franchise, you will take two huge megastars and not a great record over a rebuilding team of no names. You know that's true.
I agree that it's true. It just makes no sense. It's not the way to run an NBA franchise. Like eventually teams have to take a step back. Every team that's great now has taken a step back. Boston, they took a big step back.
They're going to take a step back. Trust me, that's going to happen. You don't need to hurry it.
Intentionally. You have to purposefully,
yes.
Like it's coming, right? Like a cliff is coming for this team. The question is, do you jump off the cliff or do you get pushed?
I think it depends on who you are, where you are, and who is on that cliff with you. I agree with you that in a lot of cities, on a lot of teams, waiting for yourself to fall off versus actually making the leap and doing it actively and purposefully and intentionally, it's smarter to do the latter.
Yes.
When you are Los Angeles, you are the Lakers, you have LeBron James and Anthony Davis, you wait until you are pushed. Because you are not getting that back again.
That is wild.
Chris,
like I don't disagree with you because that's how the Buss family has operated for generations, right? I get it. But somebody there, whether it's Rob Pelinka or whoever, you got to have to have a come to Jesus moment at some point. Be like, look, we can get this thing right in 5 years. Like we can put this thing back on track if we, deal away our veterans and build around young players. If you can swallow 2+ really bad years, we can put this team back on track. We are still the Lakers. Players want to come and play for us. We were awful when LeBron James signed with us. We were an average team when he came to Los Angeles. We can get back to that point where we can go recruit the next LeBron. Right now, you see our record? This is what it's the old Bill Parcells line. You are what your record says you are. And that's who the Lakers are. They're a mediocre team that's just not going to get better.
I'm just saying, this is the reality of the world that we live in, is that I just don't see, as good as it might be for all parties, I don't see LeBron James going to the Lakers and publicly asking for a trade, because that's what it would turn into. He'd have to ask, and of course it would become public. And I don't see the Lakers being like, yes, let's just start rebuilding now early. That's not how they operate.
Oh, God,
it's just not how either of those entities operate.
They could get so much for LeBron and AD right now. Like AD, I don't know how we can't even get into this at this point, but like there'd be half a dozen teams in the league.
Of course. I mean, are you kidding? More. Keep going. Keep going.
With the capital to do it, and like what might interest the Lakers and LeBron, you could get something back from Golden State in return. You could start the process of getting back to being the Lakers, a championship contender. Right now, they are so far away from that. All right, hopefully there'll be a quiet week next week and we don't talk about LeBron and Lakers. I do want to talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves because this is a big week for them. Because Karl Anthony Towns is making his return to Minnesota, the ex-Wolves star coming back with the Knicks. Karl Towns
I'm looking up some standings while you're talking here.
Yes,
keep going.
Cat is having an outstanding season for New York. 25 points per game, shooting 44% from three, leading the NBA in rebounds per game. If you're Minnesota, as you welcome back your former star, are you regretting that deal? At this point, are you concerned about where you are in the standings as you kind of head towards Christmas?
I don't think you're regretting the deal. Also, I'm just looking at the standings here. You're only 2 in the loss column behind the number 2 Grizzlies. I mean, this is how tight and weird the West is at the moment. So yes, they're sitting in 8th, but they're not that so far out of being back to the top of the conference. They've won 6 of their last 7. They're better defensively than I think you're giving them credit for. I think they're 4th overall right now in defensive rating.
So defensively, they're good. Offensively is where they've kind of hit off
But
a
they've
cliff.
been smothering. I mean, they really have taken charge of that side of the court, which tells me the energy and the effort and the willingness in that locker room is there.
But they've also got a human, top 5 defense in Rudy Gobert, right?
Yeah,
You're always going to have a good defense if Rudy's out there.
That's important, though.
Yeah.
That's a big deal, and that I think is going to carry them through then this middle chunk of the season. I don't worry about them. I'm not guaranteeing that they're going to get back to the conference finals, but I'm not worried about them that they're going to end the season in 8th in the West. I just don't see that happening. I feel like they had a tough sort of beginning of the season. We saw them stumble. Julius Randle clearly wasn't quite sure what he was supposed to do with himself. They weren't quite sure what to do with him. That has improved. I spoke to him when they were in LA a few weeks ago. He really is a lot more comfortable there now. And they do just sort of seem to be humming now. 6 of 7, that's a run in the NBA. And it seems like they know where they're supposed to be. They're playing together. They're playing for each other. And then therefore the offense kind of, to me, I expect it to come out of that. I don't know if they're going to, set the entire league on fire, but I'm not concerned.
Okay, but when they made the deal, my first reaction, I wrote about it, was this is about money.
I was going to say. I mean, that's why when you say, are they going to regret it? No, because while Karl Anthony Towns is coming to town, so is his salary.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm not pocket watching Mark Lowry, Alex Rodriguez, or whoever the hell winds up owning the Timberwolves. Like, you want to own an NBA franchise, spend some money. All right, you want to be like, this was a team that last season was on a path to winning a championship.
Yeah.
There was no doubt about it. They were on a path to winning a championship. They trade Karl Towns, and whatever they said at the time, like, hey, we're doing it for, depth reasons. Like, Dante DiVincenzo is going to improve our 3-point shooting. Julius Randle, you saw what he was when he was healthy last year with New York. Good player. But I never believed that. Like, I believed it was about money. And I still believe it's about money. Like, yeah, they've been playing good basketball as of late, and their defense is still good. But you can't convince me that they're a better team now than they were 6 months ago.
But it's not just about Karl's salary. It was about all the other money that was about to come due there. I mean, there was a lot of financial issues going on and concerns and people who were extension eligible and people they had to give money to. So by getting rid of that huge number with Cat, it has allowed them to have many other spots on the team be where they want them to
be. Like with Naz Reid, when his contract comes up, that's... they'll have a little more financial flexibility to go and do that. But again, it's just money. It's simple as that. It's money. Like, you had a team, but you had a team that was trending towards a championship, and you broke it up over money. Like, I can't get over that. Like that.
I mean, well, first of all, let's not pretend that it's the first organization to be doing that.
It's not. But in recent memory of a team that was in a conference finals that was young and dismantled it in a way that they did, like.
I don't know. I'm not willing to say dismantled. I think that, look, they knew who their star was.
Best player or second best player, whatever you want to put
He
it.
was not their best player.
Okay.
And they had to take him.
Who was great against Nikola Jokic in the conference semis.
He was, but they had to take him off the floor sometimes throughout the playoffs. So, I mean, look, let's not pretend that it was a perfect situation with Cat in Minnesota. I think that they saw an opportunity to take this huge chunk of money and make a trade that they did think would be viable with Randall coming in and actually work on the floor and let them keep some of their other pieces that they want to keep down the road in the future. Give them some more of that financial flexibility to build around Ant. I don't have any problem with that deal on either side still. And I think that Minnesota, yes, obviously it'd be great for them if they were number 2 in the conference right now, but they're really not that far behind.
Right. And everybody, in the West it's all bunched up. I can't look at this team and say they're better. I can't. And now, look, do I expect DiVincenzo to improve his numbers? Yes, because he was really good in New York, and I think he is a really good shooter. I don't know how much more you can expect from Randall. I think he kind of is what he is. He's going to give you 20 points per game. His efficiency numbers are terrible, but he's never going to be a lockdown 3-point shooter. And not having him out there, or not having Towns out there, takes a dimension away from them. I think, in fact, they're better when Naz Reid and Rudy Gobert are playing together.
But that was part of the gamble, right?
Yeah, that Naz would be ready for an even bigger role, and look, he's a great player. Look, when I watch a lot of Knicks games, and when I watch Cat putting up these types of numbers. And
Bodega Cat,
flawed.
baby.
Look, he's flawed. Defensively, I'm sure he drives Tom Thibodeau crazy a lot. And they still have to figure out what to do when you get Mitchell Robinson and him back in the rotation. But I watch all these numbers, I'm thinking like, man, did you really have to do it? Like, what could this team have been? Like, you can't argue that they would have gotten off to a faster start had Towns been there, because they would have had the chemistry. They know what they're doing together. I don't know. I just think they're a lesser team because of it. And I still don't like the deal. I don't like the deal at all.
You also have to see how Ant develops.
Yeah, you need time with new players and time, especially with a new forward. You're just a pick and roll partner there, but I don't love it. I'm not a fan of that deal, but we'll see. I think Towns deservedly will get a great reception.
I think he will, which I think is great, and he deserves it. I mean, we talk about the on-court fit, all of that stuff. Let's not forget, these are human beings. He was in that community for a long time. He was a great public member of that community, donated a lot of money to a lot of places, really put his time out there, and I think the people of Minnesota are going to appreciate that and thank him for it when he gets on the court there.
Are you surprised that he's had this kind of success in New York? Because it did not end well with him and Tom Thibodeau in Minnesota. And I think there was genuine concern that, he's not a soft guy, but he is a kind of happy-go-lucky guy, like a smiling all the time type of guy. There was some concern about plopping him down there into that type of environment. A lot of serious guys in New York, like Jalen Brunson, the star of that team's a serious guy. I wondered how he would fit with that group, and he has been outstanding. His overall numbers, like that rebounding, averaging 14 per game, is a tremendous number. Shooting 44% from three, tremendous numbers. Like, are you surprised at all the way Towns has fit in New York?
I'm not. I mean, he's from New Jersey. It's not like he fell off the turnip truck into New York. Yeah, I've never been to the big city before. I mean, come on. I wasn't worried about his fit back with Tibbs because I knew that the Knicks front office and Tom Thibodeau himself and Karl Anthony Towns himself are all smart enough not to go back into that partnership without some clear conversation and agreement. That was not a trade undertaken lightly. It was not like, I hope it works out. I hope they like each other this time. Obviously, those conversations were had. And Tom was very upfront about the fact that those conversations were had. He's, people are different when they're in a different situation years later. And it seems like they have really found a rhythm with each other and an appreciation for each other that maybe they didn't have earlier in their working partnership. And I don't know, I love seeing the way Karl has thrived there because he is a player who, if he fits in and the team around him can make up for some of the deficiencies that he, like any other player, has, he can he can be a rocket ship man for that team. And that's obviously what they gambled on.
Both teams took a pretty big risk in making that deal. Like the Knicks, that was basically Leon Rose saying like, hey, I know this guy. Tibbs knows this guy. I know that even though we had a team that had some good momentum, great chemistry with all the Villanova guys, I know this guy's going to make us better. And certainly the jury is still out because we haven't seen them in a playoff situation. How playable is Towns against a Boston team? How playable is he with Mitchell Robinson back in the lineup? But I think they can have some confidence that deal did make them better. I don't know how you have that confidence in Minnesota. Like, yeah, they could go on. This run could continue. They could rocket themselves up to second or third in the conference standings. But when I watch that team, and I've watched a half dozen of their games, I don't think they're a better version of the one I saw last year. And I don't know that it's possible to get back to that level without a player of the versatility of Towns.
Look, I mean, when I said we'll have to see how Ant develops, it's not because I'm wondering if he's going to develop into a superstar. We already know that. But what we saw in the playoffs last year with Anthony Edwards was he hit a little bit of a wall in a couple places,
he did,
right?
Yeah.
Some of it was physical. Some of it was mental. The level of attention, no matter how much you love the attention, the level of attention in the playoffs is different, both on the court defensively, off the court with the public and the media and everything else. And there were times where he just did not perform to the level that we know he would want to perform at. I expect that to be better this year. I expect in a couple of those very close playoff games that they lost, that Anthony Edwards, this version of him this coming spring, will be the difference in those games. And maybe that is part of how you make up for it too. I just think that they saw the financial numbers ahead of them and they said, this is how we can keep a team together that will be the best team to build around Anthony Edwards as he develops. And it might not be better this season in the short term, but I think big picture, it was the right deal for them to make. I'm still okay with that trade.
I am not with that trade.
We will
see. I do not like that trade. I hate when teams make decisions for financial reasons. If you do not want to own an NBA team, don't buy it. Like, sell it.
But
you
part
can
of
make
it-
billions of dollars selling your team. You want to line your pockets, go right ahead. But if you're going to own an NBA team, you've got to go all in. When you have a team in the conference finals, you don't break it up unless you know you are getting markedly better. And maybe it turns out that way. Maybe DiVincenzo turns it around in the second half, is a 40% three-point shooter. Maybe Randall gets back to that all-NBA form where he was shooting 40% from three. He did have that 1 year where he shot 40% from three. Maybe he gets back to all that. If that happens, I will sit here and issue a mea culpa to the Minnesota Timberwolves and their front office. But right now, they're a lesser version of themselves. They were on that level of where Oklahoma City is right now, where Dallas was last season. Memphis, jury's out on them. We'll see what happens there. But I don't know that they're on that level anymore. I think I might bump them to that second tier in the Western Conference. But
we'll see.
We'll see how it all plays out. Rachel, good to have you here in the Las Vegas studio.
I like this. And I think people who are just listening and not watching have missed Chris's horse, but this is pretty exciting and maybe can make a guest appearance if we're ever back here.
I went horseback riding once. It did not go well for me.
I would have paid a lot of money for that video. That's all I'm to say.